I got into swimming really. My father was in the army in the Second World War, and when he finished and he came back from Italy, he had a friend who was the goalkeeper for Lancaster Swimming Club, and he was persuaded to get me involved with swimming as an exercise and things like this sort of thing. So I was introduced to this gentleman from the swimming club who my father had been in the army with, and then my father encouraged me. I enjoyed the swimming, and he encouraged me into the training and more activities, and he would transport me in his car wherever there was a competition. To get better, I wanted to be a water polo player. To get better as a water polo player, I needed to be a good strong swimmer. So I started to do a lot more training for distance work. Not big distances, but smaller distances, like a mile and things like this. And I started swimming in the River Loon to start with, and coming down and swimming from Holton back down to Lancaster, because at that time you could hire a boat, and my father would hire a boat and swim down past the army camp underneath the aqueduct down to the park on the thing. And then to encourage me when I got old enough to start playing water polo, I needed to get stronger, and I used to go training. And fortunately, I knew the manager at Morecambe or outdoor swimming pool, which was a 110 metre pool, things like the open air, cold water of course, not heated. And I used to go training, and I would do about a mile every day. So 7 days a week I would swim a mile at Morecambe swimming pool, and that encouraged me. That when I was introduced to Arthur Shipley, who was part of the Cross Bay Swim organisation, he encouraged me to enter the Cross Bay Swim one time. But I never ever trained more than 1 mile at a time, but I would do it 7 days a week for a long time. So I was fairly strong, and we were competing against people who were swimming the channel both ways, or bigger long distance swims and things like this, which I must admit I was never interested in being a long distance swimmer. I wanted to be a water polo player, but a strong one, and the swimming the distance made me stronger. One of the members of Lancaster Swimming Club was Arthur Shipley, and I think he was on the organising committee for Morecambe Swimming Club. And he must have suggested that if I wanted to swim across Morecambe Bay at some time, so the first thing I did was obviously enter. Originally, we used to have heats during the summer, and then a final at the end of the summer of people who'd won one of the heats. There was never more than 10 swimmers, because we relied on the fishing fleet from Morecambe, and we relied on the oarsmen from the pilots and the people like this. And there would usually be about 10 boats would be involved with the swim. We'd get towed across Morecambe Bay by a pilot boat with all the boats tied up behind it. When we got to Grange, we would offload and we would get ready for the swim. We started the swim sometime during flat water. Every swimmer would have a boat with a pilot, and basically you followed the boat and the pilot who knew the currents and things like this. So you'd start from Grange, and at the time you could go into the water direct from the promenade there, and you'd start your swim just between the swimming pool at Grange and the railway station. And you would swim up towards Arnside. You couldn't attempt to swim straight to Morecambe, which was the shortest way, but you had to swim in dead water up as far as near to Arnside, and then you get in the current that was coming past Arnside and coming back down by Silverdale. The current would assist you with the swim. So you were swimming a lot more faster than you could if you were just in a swimming pool or in dead water. And we'd go down from Arnside, past Silverdale, down Happy Mount Park, and then in the channel that come down the front of Morecambe Bay. Yeah. And the finish was always by the Stone Jetty at Morecambe, between the Stone Jetty and the Battery Hotel on the beach. You had to start crossing the channel as soon as you could, because quite often if you didn't get onto the beach side of the channel, when you got to the Stone Jetty, the current was so fast that you couldn't actually get onto the sand. And I've known that people have swum the whole 10 miles and then been disqualified because they'd been washed further south than the intention. Yeah. And then you'd get up onto the sand and walk up onto the Stone Jetty, be presented to people, and that's where people were standing watching you to finish and things like that. I was always a competitive swimmer. I was never at national standard competing in short distances, but I was a good, strong swimmer, and swimming a mile was no problem whatsoever. And I used to enjoy it, and it was good, it kept me fit, and it made me a better water polo player because of the strength that I had with my legs. I had no real intention of swimming to win. It was very nice to win it, and I won it. I think the first time the heat, I won the heat, and I think I won the final later on. I think I won it 2 years, and I think I was the first local swimmer to win the Cross Bay Swim. I think there's competitive swimming in pools, in races and things like that, which you see nowadays, you see on television all the time. But there wasn't really that many competitions for people who weren't the fastest swimmers, but they were generally good, strong swimmers, and they liked swimming outdoors. Swimming in a swimming pool is a little bit boring. You're going up and down and all things sort of thing, and nothing changes. But when you're outside, you can't see very much because you're down at water level, and generally you need a boat with you, and we were relying on the oarsmen from the fishing fleet. Unfortunately, Morecambe Swimming Club had good relations with the people from the fishing fleet, and we had about 10 boats, and so you could have 10 swimmers and things like this. And partway through my experience there, to try and encourage more local or swimmers with less ability for doing long distances, they introduced the inshore swim, and this was a race from the Stone Jetty at Morecambe up towards Happy Mount Park, and then you turned round some buoys and you came back with the current. So you started at dead water and you swam against what current there was up as far as Happy Mount Park, turned and then came back and finished, and that was classed as about a 4-mile swim. And it was for people who didn't fancy swimming for 2-3 hours crossing the bay. I used to enjoy doing that. It was, to me, it was just a nice inshore outdoor swimming race. You weren't really competing against other swimmers technically, because you couldn't see them. You were in the water and all you were doing was following the boat that with the oarsman who was taking you there. So you quite often you weren't swimming against a competitor. You're really swimming, doing the best you can with your own ability. It was always very nice when you found that you did win, but it really mainly it was because you liked open water swimming and you liked doing the distance and you'd like competing. Before I entered the Cross Bay swim with Lancaster Swimming Club, we had a couple of local swims in the River Loon, and at the time there was a company who you could hire boats and people would go rowing on River Loon and things like that, and we had two swims, one for juniors under maybe 16 years old, and that started at the aqueduct and you swam back down towards Lancaster and you finished. There's a little park on the side of the river there, and that finished there. Again, you had to have a boat for every individual swimmer, but that was only about a good a mile swim for juniors. And then there was a more senior swim which started between the old army camp and Alton, and again you went up with a boat. Every swimmer had a boat, and the junior one was always on the northern side of the river. The senior one, because of the curve of the river, came down on the west side, coming down past the power station and the industrial things. So you swam from Halton down the river underneath the aqueduct and then crossing until you got towards the weir, and the finish was always halfway down the park, down at the end of the River Loon before it got to the weir and the mill. The River Loon swim, we had a beautiful trophy presented to us by a gentleman called Ackroyd, and he owned a little cinema at the bottom end of Church Street in Lancaster. The River Loon swim always took place on a Saturday, and at the end of the days the winners and the runners-up came, and we had to attend the cinema, which was, I think it was called the Picturedrome, and the Saturday evening film would be stopped, and then you would be asked to come up onto the stage and present it to the people, which wasn't necessarily the most popular thing. People had gone for the cinema not to see somebody being presented with a trophy, but we were presented on the stage with the winning trophy and the runners-up and things like this. Halfway the film was stopped, and for about 20 minutes you were being presented with the trophies, which was not always necessarily the most popular thing. So you got a number of whistles and things like this, and obviously some claps and things like this. I think I won that one about 13 times. It was always a nice easy swim of about a mile and a half or something like that. When I started outdoor swimming, it was before the time of having wetsuits and things like this. So you just had a swimming costume and you swam outdoors in cold water, no heated water whatsoever. And it wasn't until much after my time of swimming that wetsuits started to come in. And at the start, it was illegal for you to compete in a competition with the aid of a wetsuit, and that was the thing. I remember one time I took somebody up to Windermere. Outdoor swimming was getting very, very popular. Most people there were wearing wetsuits, and I was talking to a commentator who was commentating on the event, and she asked me if I'd been interested in swimming, and I told her I'd swum Morecambe Bay and things like this. And in the commentary I did mention that when I was swimming outdoors it was illegal to compete with the aid of wetsuits, but nowadays, and at that time, everybody was wearing wetsuits. I didn't like swimming outdoors for a lot of pleasure, because generally you're swimming against yourself, you're not competing, and I liked competing. I was competitive, but so to do an actual race where you're swimming against somebody was quite enjoyable. When you're training for this, generally you're by yourself, I would be in Morecambe outdoor swimming pool. I'd be there for, I very rarely swam for much more than half an hour, but I'd be going up and down the pool there with nobody else, even in the pool. I had a coach there who would be on the side. I was competitive enough to I liked competing against other people, but the training, all the training before it was generally by yourself. So you had to be keen enough to put up with those kind of conditions of going outdoors in cold water for half an hour. The really good cross bay and the cross channel swimmers would go and they would swim for 2 or 3 hours.
Yeah.
I never swam more than half an hour at a time. I liked being physically fit. I was never I was a bit, with a lot of swimmers are slightly overweight and things like, so we're not the fastest. I used to play football at school and all this sort of thing. But the one thing that I did turn out to really enjoy was swimming. And I was more successful at medium distance swimming. I used to swim for the schoolboys swimming squad, and I liked playing water polo, and I was reasonably good at water polo, and I liked the competition, and I liked the team spirit that you got with the swimming club. I don't think anybody that I knew in the swimming club in those days smoked. I mean, people do enjoy smoking. I've never had a cigarette. But nobody in the swimming club, and there could be 20, 30, 40 people there, and not one of them smoked. So part of keeping fit was for me to do the training. And I got qualified as a swimming teacher, and I used to take classes with adult people and children. And Lancaster Swimming Club had a really good reputation for bringing on young non-swimmers. If you learn to swim, you don't have to be a good swimmer, but as long as you're not scared of water, if you fall in and you don't panic, you can usually get out.
Yeah.